For decades, California lived in fear of a shadow that could slip into any home without warning. He was quiet, calculating, and terrifyingly patient. Families woke to find their doors unlocked, windows silently opened, and strangers inside their bedrooms. Women were attacked in the sanctity of their own homes, while their partners were forced to watch helplessly. He left no trace, no fingerprints, only fear. He was called the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and for years police had no idea these names belonged to the same man. Every community he touched became haunted by his presence, every street a stage for his twisted game. This is the real story of the Golden State Killer, the man who evaded capture for decades, terrorized hundreds, and whose crimes would finally be unraveled through science, persistence, and sheer determination. In the early 1970s, California's suburbs were booming. Families moved into cookie-cutter homes, leaving windows open for summer breezes, doors unlocked for neighbors, believing they were safe. But the Golden State Killer saw opportunity where others saw comfort. His first crimes were subtle, almost casual burglaries in Visalia, a small city in central California. Drawers were rifled, underwear stolen, small items moved, but never taken for monetary value. It was as if he were learning, rehearsing for something much darker. Residents initially dismissed these incidents as petty thefts, but patterns began to emerge. A young woman might notice a shadow at her window, a strange sound in the night, the faint smell of someone else in her home. Then the intruder escalated. Masked, armed, and methodical, he confronted his victims. He tied them up, threatened them, sometimes for hours, studying their reactions, asserting total control. He had become the Visalia Ransacker, but the story was only beginning. By 1976, he had moved north to Sacramento. Now known as the East Area Rapist, his crimes became more violent and meticulously planned. Couples were attacked at night, men forced to lie still while he violated their partners. He taunted victims, sometimes leaving objects stacked on their backs as warnings, testing their obedience. Police were baffled, pursuing leads that vanished as quickly as he did. He was clever, athletic, and frighteningly adaptive. He rode bikes through neighborhoods to survey escape routes, monitored radio scanners for police activity, and vanished into backyards and drainage canals like a ghost. Between 1976 and 1979, at least 13 rapes were attributed to him. Survivors described his voice, his habits, his terrifying patience. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the rapes stopped. But terror re-emerged in Southern California in 1979. Murders began. Couples found dead in their homes, beaten, shot, or strangled. There were no signs of forced entry, but the same patterns, control, stalking, and intimidation were unmistakable. This was the original Night Stalker, the same man who had haunted Northern California for years, now escalating his violence. From 1979 to 1986, at least 13 murders occurred under his hand. Police had no idea that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. Different jurisdictions, different names, and the limitations of the era's investigative tools made it nearly impossible to connect the dots. The Golden State Killer had evolved, becoming more deadly, more calculated, and all the more elusive. Cold case investigators would spend decades chasing fragments of his life, while survivors lived with lasting trauma and fear. Advances in DNA technology in the 2000s began to rewrite the story. Long-forgotten evidence was retested, connections emerged, and eventually investigators realized the truth. The Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the original Night Stalker were one and the same. Using public genealogy databases, painstaking research, and relentless detective work, investigators traced his DNA to a man living quietly in his hometown. Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, seemingly ordinary, had been hiding in plain sight for decades. On April 24, 2018, he was arrested. The Golden State Killer's capture closed one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history, but it also reopened wounds for countless victims. His story challenges our understanding of evil, the limits of law enforcement, and how someone so ordinary can commit horrors beyond imagination. To truly understand him, we must go deeper into his upbringing, his psychology, his time in law enforcement, and the chilling methods that allowed him to terrorize an entire state for decades. This is the story behind the crimes, the man who committed them, and the relentless pursuit that finally brought him to justice. Using public genealogy databases, painstaking research, and relentless detective work, investigators traced his DNA to a man living quietly in his hometown. Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, seemingly ordinary, had been hiding in plain sight for decades. On April 24, 2018, he was arrested. Even after his arrest, questions remained. How had DeAngelo managed to evade capture for so long? What kind of man could lead such a double life, blending into a community while leaving a trail of terror behind him? To understand the full scope of his crimes, we must examine his early years, the experiences that shaped him, and the subtle signs that hinted at the darkness within. Joseph James DeAngelo was born in 1945 in Bath, New York. From a young age, he displayed a fascination with control and order. Teachers and classmates remembered a boy who was quiet, withdrawn, and meticulous. He excelled in tasks that required precision, yet he also exhibited early signs of aggression and a need for dominance over others. Some who knew him recalled a tendency to bully peers, targeting those who seemed weaker or different, testing boundaries and asserting power. After high school, DeAngelo joined the United States Navy, serving during the Vietnam War era. The military instilled discipline, structure, and routine, all qualities that would later become part of his methodical approach to crime. Some experts suggest that his time in the armed forces may have sharpened his tactical skills, teaching him surveillance, stealth, and the ability to anticipate human behavior. While in the Navy, he maintained a facade of normalcy, appearing obedient, professional, and disciplined. But beneath the surface, his fascination with control, dominance, and secrecy continued to grow. Following his military service, DeAngelo moved to California, where he began working in law enforcement. He served as a police officer in Auburn, California during the early 1970s. This position granted him unique access to investigative knowledge, tactics, and the inner workings of criminal investigations. He understood how police fought, how they responded, and the methods they relied on to catch perpetrators. This knowledge became a key advantage, allowing him to commit his crimes while remaining just out of reach of law enforcement. By the mid-1970s, his criminal behavior had escalated. Starting as the Visalia ransacker, he broke into homes, stole items of personal significance, and refined his ability to move undetected. These burglaries were more than practice. They were studies in psychology, an experiment in fear, control, and observation. Each home he entered added to his knowledge base, teaching him patterns of human behavior, the placement of locks, the layout of suburban houses, and the vulnerabilities that would later make him a terrifying predator. As the East Area Rapist, he applied this knowledge with chilling precision. He selected victims methodically, often surveilling them for weeks or months before striking. He observed daily routines, noted the placement of objects, and learned the exact moments when homes were most vulnerable. Victims reported a calculated, almost ritualistic approach. He would arrive silently, often at night, using weapons to intimidate and control, speaking in low, threatening tones, carefully timing each step to maximize fear. His intelligence and meticulous planning allowed him to evade capture repeatedly. Law enforcement struggled to link crimes across jurisdictions. Each department worked in isolation, unaware that they were investigating the same man. His adaptability was remarkable. When police tactics changed, he adjusted. When neighborhoods installed alarms, he studied them, finding ways to bypass them. When news reports shared investigative details, he modified his behavior accordingly. Psychologists analyzing DeAngelo's behavior highlight his need for dominance and psychological control. He was not impulsive in the conventional sense. He was strategic, patient, and obsessive. His crimes were acts of power, asserting control over his victims in ways that went well beyond physical violence. They were meant to terrorize, humiliate, and instill lasting fear. Despite his outward appearance as a law-abiding citizen, a family man, mechanic, former officer, his double life persisted for over a decade. The same communities that unknowingly trusted him were the ones he terrorized most. This duality highlights a chilling truth. Some predators can exist entirely undetected, hiding in plain sight, while the ordinary life they portray shields them from suspicion. The breakthrough in the case came not from traditional policing, but from science and persistence. Using DNA collected from decades-old crime scenes, investigators cross-referenced profiles through genealogy databases. This process, painstaking and precise, required constructing family trees, examining public records, and narrowing down potential suspects with remarkable accuracy. Each connection brought the net closer, until finally all paths led to DeAngelo. His arrest stunned the nation. For victims, decades of unanswered questions and lingering fear suddenly converged into a single moment of reckoning. Families who had long mourned the loss of security, peace, and innocence faced the reality of confronting the man who had destroyed their sense of safety. Public reaction was a mix of relief, disbelief, and horror. How could one man, a former police officer, commit such atrocities across California without detection for so long? Understanding the Golden State Killer requires a close look at the timeline of his crimes, the evolution from burglary to rape to murder, and the intricate psychological patterns that governed his behavior. It also demands attention to the societal and investigative limitations of the era, fragmented police jurisdictions, lack of shared databases, and the technological constraints that allowed him to operate undisturbed. From the earliest Visalia break-ins to the terrifying nighttime home invasions of Sacramento, and finally to the murders in Southern California, his crimes followed a pattern of escalation, learning, and adaptation. Each phase built upon the previous one, demonstrating his capacity for long-term planning and extreme patience. Victims' experiences, though horrifyingly unique, shared common threads: control, fear, and the inescapable sense that someone was always watching. DeAngelo's story is not only about the crimes themselves, but also about the investigative evolution that ultimately brought him to justice. It's a story of technology, persistence, and the tireless work of law enforcement and forensic experts committed to ending a decades-long nightmare. Every lead, every DNA match, and every genealogical connection was a step closer to closing a chapter that had remained open for too long. In the next phase, we explore the specific methods he used to select and stalk his victims, the terrifying rituals he employed during attacks, and the extraordinary lengths he went to remain undetected. We examine the psychology behind his crimes and the lessons law enforcement learned that would forever change the way cold cases are solved. This is the continuation of the Golden State Killer's story, a story of terror, cunning, and the relentless pursuit of justice that eventually brought a predator out of the shadows. This is the continuation of the Golden State Killer's story, a story of terror, cunning, and the relentless pursuit of justice that eventually brought a predator out of the shadows. To understand the depth of his crimes, we must examine how he meticulously selected and stalked his victims. He did not strike randomly. Every attack was carefully planned, often taking weeks or even months of surveillance. He studied routines, observed entrances and exits, noted when lights were turned off, and listened for the faintest sounds that might indicate vulnerability. No detail was too small. The layout of a home, the placement of furniture, even the timing of a spouse's work schedule could determine whether he struck. During the East Area Rapist phase, his attacks were methodical and ritualistic. Couples were awakened in the dead of night, threatened with weapons, and tied with ligatures that he brought with him. He stacked objects on the male victims' backs as a test of compliance, a chilling way to assert dominance and instill terror. The women were subjected to hours of assault, often while he lingered in the same home, moving from room to room, controlling every moment. His ability to remain calm and deliberate while committing such acts revealed a terrifying blend of intelligence and sadism. Neighbors and community members described seeing a man on a bicycle, often at odd hours, pedaling through quiet streets. He was scouting, mapping escape routes, and learning which houses were vulnerable. Occasionally, he would make contact with victims outside the home first, testing boundaries, observing reactions, and gauging how much risk he could take. These small, almost innocuous interactions were part of a larger psychological strategy. Every detail informed his attacks. The original Night Stalker crimes in Southern California marked an escalation in both violence and planning. Victims were found beaten, strangled, or shot. Entry points were subtle, almost invisible. Windows and doors were bypassed with tools he carried in a compact prepared kit. Once inside, he displayed the same methodical control, often spending extended periods in the home. Some victims reported feeling as though they were being watched even before the attack began, hinting at the extensive surveillance he conducted beforehand. His intelligence extended to evading capture. He was aware of police procedures, radio scanner frequencies, and investigative methods, which he exploited to avoid detection. He adapted to changes in law enforcement techniques, ensuring that his methods remained unpredictable. If a community increased patrols or shared information about the attacks, he would shift neighborhoods, attack at different hours, or change entry tactics. This adaptability, combined with patience, allowed him to remain at large for decades. Psychologists studying DeAngelo's behavior noted patterns of compulsion and ritual. His crimes were not impulsive, but deliberate, reflecting deep-seated desires for control and dominance. The rituals, the tying, the stacking of objects, the use of masks, served a psychological purpose, reinforcing his authority over the victims and enhancing his sense of power. Each act was meticulously recorded in his mind, creating a mental catalog of terror that guided future attacks. Despite his outward appearance as an ordinary citizen, a married man with a job and family life, he led a dual existence. By day, he was unremarkable, blending into suburban life. By night, he became a predator, executing meticulously planned assaults that left entire communities in fear. This duality puzzled investigators and fascinated criminal profilers. How could one man reconcile the banality of daily life with such calculated evil? The connection between his various crime sprees remained elusive for years due to the limitations of the era. Different jurisdictions handled cases independently, often without sharing details. Communication between police departments was slower, databases were not centralized, and forensic techniques were rudimentary compared to modern standards. These factors created gaps in understanding, allowing DeAngelo to continue unchecked. Victims' accounts were crucial in piecing together the scope of his crimes. Their descriptions of voice, movements, and behavior, although fragmented, revealed a consistent pattern. He spoke in low, threatening tones, sometimes mimicking authority figures, other times whispering menacingly. He demonstrated knowledge of victims' routines and vulnerabilities. He adapted quickly when confronted with resistance, escalating intimidation or violence to maintain control. In the mid-1980s, as murders increased in Southern California, investigators began to notice behavioral consistencies linking the East Area Rapist to the original Night Stalker. However, without advanced DNA technology and interjurisdictional cooperation, definitive connections could not be made. The Golden State Killer had become a master of exploiting the limitations of law enforcement while perfecting his own methods. The eventual breakthrough came decades later as forensic science evolved. DNA evidence collected from crime scenes, once considered insufficient or degraded, could now be amplified and analyzed with precision. Investigators revisited cold cases with fresh eyes, cross-referencing old reports, re-interviewing witnesses, and applying new profiling techniques. Each step brought clarity, revealing the terrifying pattern of a single individual operating across decades, a predator who had learned, adapted, and perfected his craft. Understanding his methods is crucial, not only to comprehend the horror experienced by victims, but also to grasp the ingenuity and meticulousness that allowed him to evade justice for so long. The Golden State Killer was not merely a criminal, he was a planner, a strategist, and an observer. His crimes were a terrifying study of patience, control, and psychological manipulation, making his eventual capture all the more remarkable. Next, we will explore the painstaking investigative efforts that finally brought him to justice, the role of modern forensic science, and how persistence, innovation, and determination overcame decades of fear, secrecy, and elusiveness. This next phase of the story reveals how the combined efforts of detectives, forensic experts, and the victims themselves unraveled the long-held secrets of the Golden State Killer. Next, we will explore the painstaking investigative efforts that finally brought him to justice, the role of modern forensic science, and how persistence, innovation, and determination overcame decades of fear, secrecy, and elusiveness. This next phase of the story reveals how the combined efforts of detectives, forensic experts, and the victims themselves unraveled the long-held secrets of the Golden State Killer. In the early 2000s, cold case units began re-examining unsolved sexual assaults and murders from the 1970s and 80s with renewed determination. Advances in DNA technology had revolutionized criminal investigations. Evidence that had sat untouched in evidence lockers for decades could now be amplified, analyzed, and compared with unprecedented accuracy. Investigators began testing old rape kits, swabs, and other biological material collected from victims and crime scenes, hoping to uncover matches that had previously been impossible to detect. One of the key breakthroughs came from connecting DNA evidence from Northern and Southern California. Forensic scientists realized that the Visalia ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the original Night Stalker shared the same genetic profile. Suddenly, what had been seen as separate series of crimes spanning multiple decades and regions were now recognized as the work of a single individual. This revelation changed the scope of the investigation, creating a unified strategy and task force dedicated to identifying and capturing the man who had eluded justice for so long. Detectives faced enormous challenges. Traditional criminal databases had no matches, as the suspect had no recent arrests that would have placed his DNA in the system. He had lived quietly, avoiding behaviors that would trigger law enforcement attention. Investigators had to think outside the box, using innovative methods to narrow down potential suspects. This included analyzing behavioral patterns, geographic profiling, and the meticulous study of crime scene details, which revealed a distinct method of operation: careful planning, strategic selection of victims, and an unparalleled ability to evade capture. The turning point came when investigators employed a controversial but groundbreaking technique: investigative genetic genealogy. By uploading the crime scene DNA to publicly accessible genealogy databases, detectives were able to identify distant relatives of the suspect. This approach required building extensive family trees, analyzing patterns of inheritance, and systematically eliminating individuals until only a few potential suspects remained. Every step demanded patience, precision, and exhaustive cross-referencing of public records, birth certificates, and property documents. Finally, the trail led to Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer who had lived a quiet life in his hometown. Investigators knew that conventional methods would not be enough to secure a conclusive identification. They discreetly collected DNA samples from items DeAngelo discarded, such as a tissue or cup, ensuring that the evidence could be linked without alerting him. When forensic analysts compared this DNA to samples collected from decades-old crime scenes, the match was undeniable. The Golden State Killer had been identified. The arrest of DeAngelo in April 2018 marked the culmination of decades of investigative work, blending traditional detective work with cutting-edge science. Yet the story did not end there. Prosecutors faced the challenge of bringing decades-old crimes to trial, many of which had faded from immediate memory and whose physical evidence had deteriorated over time. Survivors had to relive horrific experiences, providing testimony that would be both emotionally and psychologically taxing. The case also raised broader questions about the ethics and implications of using genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. While it had successfully identified one of America's most notorious criminals, it opened debates about privacy, consent, and the balance between public safety and individual rights. Lawmakers, ethicists, and the general public began to examine how far technology should go in aiding law enforcement. Throughout the investigation, victims played a crucial role. Their willingness to come forward, share detailed accounts, and assist in identifying patterns was invaluable. Many had carried the weight of fear and trauma for decades, and their courage in revisiting these experiences contributed to a breakthrough that ultimately delivered justice. Their testimony also provided investigators with a psychological understanding of the perpetrator, reinforcing patterns of control, manipulation, and ritual that had defined his crimes. The Golden State Killer case became a turning point in law enforcement's approach to cold cases. It demonstrated that with persistence, technology, and interdisciplinary collaboration, even decades-old mysteries could be solved. Task forces began adopting similar methods across the country, revisiting cold cases with a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by the success that brought DeAngelo to justice. Yet beyond the science and the strategy, the case remains a stark reminder of the human impact of his crimes. The fear, trauma, and disruption caused by decades of predation left indelible marks on countless lives. Families had their sense of safety shattered. Survivors endured years of psychological scars. Communities were transformed by suspicion and fear. The arrest brought answers, but it also reopened wounds, highlighting the enduring consequences of his actions. As we continue, we delve deeper into the trial, the evidence presented, the confessions, and the eventual sentencing of Joseph James DeAngelo. We explore how decades of meticulous investigation, survivor testimony, and modern forensic science converged to ensure that one of the most infamous serial criminals in American history would finally be held accountable for his decades of terror. As we continue, we delve deeper into the trial, the evidence presented, the confessions, and the eventual sentencing of Joseph James DeAngelo. We explore how decades of meticulous investigation, survivor testimony, and modern forensic science converged to ensure that one of the most infamous serial criminals in American history would finally be held accountable for his decades of terror. The trial of Joseph James DeAngelo was unprecedented, not only because of the notoriety of his crimes, but also due to the unique challenges posed by the passage of time. Many of the attacks had occurred over 30 years prior, meaning that evidence was old, memories had faded, and some physical proof had deteriorated. Despite these obstacles, prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the chain of events, relying heavily on survivor testimonies, forensic evidence, and detailed investigative records. Victims testified with extraordinary bravery, recounting the harrowing moments of the attacks. They described the intrusions, the threats, and the overwhelming fear they felt. Each account added weight to the prosecution's case, illustrating a consistent pattern of behavior that spanned decades and thousands of miles. Their courage not only provided justice in the courtroom, but also empowered others who had suffered in silence, demonstrating that their experiences were valid and recognized by the legal system. DNA evidence played a central role in linking DeAngelo definitively to the crimes. Forensic analysts explained how genetic material recovered from decades-old crime scenes matched DeAngelo's DNA profile, confirming that the East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker were one and the same. This evidence, combined with meticulous records of his movements, employment, and residence during the times of the attacks, painted a compelling picture of guilt. The prosecution also highlighted the chilling methods he used to select, stalk, and terrorize his victims. They detailed his patterns of surveillance, the timing and planning of his assaults, and the psychological control he exercised over his victims. Through these descriptions, the courtroom, and by extension the public, gained insight into the mind of a man who had lived a double life, outwardly normal, but inwardly consumed by violent urges and the desire for domination. Throughout the trial, the defense attempted to challenge the evidence and questioned the reliability of decades-old memories. However, the consistency of survivor testimonies and the scientific certainty of DNA analysis proved overwhelming. The jury saw a clear picture of a methodical, calculating individual who had evaded capture for years, but whose actions could no longer remain hidden. In addition to the trial itself, prosecutors faced the emotional weight of presenting crimes that had left lasting scars on victims and communities alike. Each recounting of violence was a reminder of the fear and trauma inflicted by DeAngelo. The courtroom became a space not only for justice, but also for recognition of the enduring impact of his actions. Survivors were heard, validated, and ultimately part of the process that ensured he would not harm another person. DeAngelo eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and other crimes as part of a plea agreement that spared victims and their families the ordeal of a prolonged trial. His admissions detailed the scope of his offenses, the planning involved, and the calculated nature of his attacks. These confessions provided closure to many, confirming long-held suspicions and answering questions that had lingered for decades. The sentencing was historic. Joseph James DeAngelo received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. For survivors and communities affected, it was a moment of justice, a recognition that the state had finally held him accountable. The public response was intense, with national media covering the trial extensively, reflecting the widespread impact of his crimes and the collective relief that justice had been served. Beyond the courtroom, the case prompted a broader discussion about law enforcement, forensic science, and the investigation of cold cases. The use of genetic genealogy became a new tool in solving crimes, leading to the identification of other suspects in previously unsolved cases. The Golden State Killer case demonstrated the importance of persistence, innovation, and collaboration between law enforcement, forensic scientists, and the community. Yet, despite the closure of the trial, the story leaves a lingering impact. Survivors continue to grapple with the psychological aftermath. Families reflect on lost peace and security, and communities remember the decades of fear that had pervaded their neighborhoods. The case is a stark reminder of both the horrors humans are capable of and the power of resilience, determination, and justice to confront them. In the final part, we examine the legacy of the Golden State Killer case, how it transformed criminal investigations, shaped modern forensic practices, and left an indelible mark on law enforcement and public consciousness. The capture and conviction of Joseph James DeAngelo not only brought justice to countless victims, but it also demonstrated the power of persistence, innovation, and collaboration across decades. Investigative genetic genealogy, the groundbreaking method that identified DeAngelo, has since become a crucial tool in solving cold cases nationwide. Law enforcement agencies now revisit decades-old unsolved crimes with renewed hope, armed with technology that once seemed unimaginable. The Golden State Killer case proved that even crimes committed long ago could be solved when science, meticulous investigation, and determination intersect. The story also highlights the human impact of crime. Survivors' courage in coming forward, recounting their trauma, and assisting in investigations was instrumental to solving the case. Their resilience reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable fear, individuals can find the strength to confront their past and help prevent future tragedies. Communities that lived in fear for decades witnessed firsthand the importance of vigilance, awareness, and support for victims. Beyond law enforcement, the case sparked important discussions about privacy, ethics, and the role of public genealogy databases in criminal investigations. Society grappled with balancing individual rights against public safety, forcing new laws, regulations, and ethical frameworks to evolve alongside advancing technology. The legacy of the Golden State Killer is both chilling and instructive. It underscores the depths of human depravity, but also the heights of human determination. It is a story of darkness and light, of terror inflicted and justice pursued. Every piece of evidence, every investigative breakthrough, and every survivor testimony contributed to a narrative that spans decades, showing that no matter how cunning or patient a criminal may be, truth and accountability can prevail. Today, the Golden State Killer case stands as a testament to the evolution of criminal justice, the power of modern forensic science, and the resilience of survivors. It teaches that justice may take time, but it is never truly out of reach. The fear he caused may linger in memories, but the resolution of his crimes offers a measure of closure and a powerful reminder that even the most elusive predators can be brought to justice. The story of Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, will remain a defining chapter in American criminal history. It is a story of horror, resilience, innovation, and ultimately justice. A story that reminds us that courage, science, and perseverance can shine a light even in the darkest corners, ensuring that no shadow of terror can remain forever hidden.